It was time to go out and do some more collecting the SD cards from the trail cameras. Over the last couple weeks, call schedule and some bitter weather kept us off the steeper slopes because of the significant amount of ice formation. Today seemed a lot better. There's snow, and this is somewhat covered with ice and a bit slippery, however, a little bit more navigable. Frozen ground makes a little bit better traction. There's been deer activity going to Misery Condo and the camera just beyond it. Over the last couple weeks, there's quite a bit of activity. The weather was milder initially, and with a little bit more time, we developed even more snow and a few rougher conditions. One doe took the opportunity to bed down and rest for a while the snow was gently falling. She ended up resting for a good hour before finally getting up and starting to stretch her legs to get moving. Heading down Misery Hill was a bit more sketchy than it has been previously. The ice on top of the snow made it a little bit more sketchy, particularly towards the middle part of the hill and down towards the lower aspect where the ice caused you to slide a little bit off to the side. Without compensating with the wheel, we managed to slide down to a little bit safer area. First stop were the cameras right in front of us. There's a fair amount of activity, and first we'll be looking kind of towards the southwest from that camera. We have two cameras, one looking to the southwest and the other one looking more to the southeast. Coyotes have been busy during the evening, stalking their prey and filling their bellies. We've also seen a number of deer which have shed their antlers by now. Those first two still have their headgear. However, the young buck following has some scars on his forehead and probably just recently shed those antlers. More coyotes and the prowl during the late evening, and you can see from the next few videos that we had a little bit more snowfall over the last couple weeks. Kimber bounded out of the XP as soon as we got to the bottom of the hill and triggered the camera for the last video before I could get to it and turn off the camera and collect the SD card. The next videos are looking to the southeast, and you can see that earlier we had very little snow left, and a little bit later had more snowfall to almost cover the ground at times. You can see the coyote stalking this area a little bit after 7 in the evening, and we get another view of the bucks that still had headgear, as well as the one trailing that has lost his headgear, and you can see a little bit better the scars on his forehead from this angle. The coyotes usually hunt in packs, and for some reason usually we don't see on the camera several of the coyotes following in line. Something seems to have startled this bunch of does, since they're pretty much on the move heading out to the east. There seem to be quite a few of them in this line, so there must have been something that had gotten them riled up to the west. A little bit more snow on the ground, and you can see that these deer are taking a little bit easier moving towards the west. You can actually see a little bit better on this very young buck the area that he must have recently just shed his antlers. With the SD cards changed into cameras, we're going to head west on the North Bank Trail. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot less ice on this since the north side is facing into the southern sun. There's a little bit less ice here, and that makes it a little bit less treacherous. You notice that in that last portion we were angled a little bit more with our right side up, since the left portion of the trail had collapsed over towards the creek from erosion. As we're getting down towards the creek bottom, you notice that things have thawed out quite a bit, and it's getting quite muddy as we approach Grant Junction. Fortunately, the creek is flowing nicely and not covered with ice, and we have a nice solid sheet of rock where we do our crossing usually. On the creek bed itself, we have pretty good traction, and right in front of us, the ice is covering a lot of the creek where the water is not ripping through over the rocks. We're approaching Jericho Road so that we can make our trip up to collect the cards on the platform blind areas. We go up Jericho Road, we have a lot more snow since This is facing the north. We're sliding to the right with the rear end, even though we tried to maneuver our wheels. Back down the hill, we got a little bit better traction, and hopefully we won't have too many other episodes as we're making it up this somewhat moderate slope that still has a lot of ice covering the snow itself. This area gets a little bit more sketchy since it drops off a little bit more significantly to the right side, and we have to wheel around towards the left to make it up the rest of the hill. As you can see, a lot of these small trees grow despite going and using the trail, particularly these cedars that plagued the area up to the platform. Platform blind is on the right, and we'll be collecting the cards, and we'll first be looking at the northern view. This poor doe looks like she took an arrow in the buttocks, but it appears to be healing with just a little bit of a limp. This young buck survived the season. He looks like he's only 2.5 years old and might actually be a pretty good shooter in another 2 years, possibly 1. Only about 8 more weeks and we'll be looking at turkey season. Bit more snow here. Yesterday evening, that's the same 8-pointer, but looking towards the south side. A couple more young bucks in the evening on the 16th. And here's a coyote feasting on what he managed to catch and is currently devouring. Early February with a nice green up and warmer temperatures, which changed towards the middle of the month with a bit more snow. That snow continued to intensify a little bit, and the green grass went to snow covered in just a matter of a couple days. Having swapped out the SD cards at the platform blind, we're heading south along the border, following the power line easement down towards the south bench, which is a little bit over the hill, and down to a little bit more level spot. The south bench is the area that we constructed the pallet blind, and we're going to be arriving at the pallet blind in just a moment. Looks like the younger bucks are dropping their headgear a little bit earlier than the older bucks, and this one's a little bit lopsided. All the videos from the south bench are facing towards the north. The videos that we got from the camera, which is facing to the south, has mostly all squirrels. There were very few videos of any deer, and rarely a couple possum or raccoons. It seems the majority of the traffic is to the north on this bench portion of the site. Again, Kimber bounded out of the XP as soon as we stopped, and she had to check out the scents of all the deer that had been in this area previously. That dog loves getting out in the woods and finding her way with all the different animal scents that are presented to her. SD cards all changed out. We're heading back down Jericho Road. I was a little bit hesitant to go on down this area since it'd been so icy, but decided that we'd go ahead and see if we could make it without sliding off to the left side. Actually, it wasn't as bad as I thought it might be, and it was fairly stable until we got to this area right before the area that we had slid off to the side. You can see by the previous track marks. Once we got down this far, things went much easier, and it was a lot more stable once we got down towards the creek bed itself. Following the deer tracks again along the creek bed, coming up on the creek crossing. This portion of the creek has broken up ice with the shallower nature and areas of rippling. Now we're back over on the north side and back on the North Bank Trail. Short break, and Kimber had to investigate the broken up ice before she made her way back to the bank to get back in the XP to move on. We're heading west along the North Bank Trail, and we're going to be heading down to where we got the next camera positioned at an intersection of the North Bank Trail and the logging run, which is right here on the right side. We're going to be heading on up this hill to see if there's any game activity as we traverse back towards the higher elevation. This is where we're getting close to the property border with our neighbor to the north. That clear area is the end of the line of our property, and we'll be heading on back down the hill looking for any additional spots that may be of interest in the future for possibly another blind. Not very much activity off of the trail. We're going to be coming up on the camera to the left side at the trail intersection, and we might be able to see what activity is at the intersection itself. Again, coyote activity, which is not too surprising at all. Unfortunately, the majority of the action that we saw on the videos captured by this camera were just at the very bottom. I had to make a mental note to go ahead and change the angle of this camera. We swept up the SD cards, changed it out, and then headed back to the barn for a little bit of a lunch break. Following lunch, we had a couple more stops to make. We were going to pick up some of the SD cards on the camera by the pond, as well as by the fire pit, but we wanted to swing down around Cabin Circle to make sure that we hadn't had any weather damage over the last couple weeks. As we were moving on down, the pond is still fairly frozen since there's no real activity. The camera that we're going to be checking out is dead ahead. We're going to swing on down to Cabin Circle to make sure that everything is in order and we haven't had any fallen trees, which in the past have caused some damage. Outhouse is intact. Interestingly, the large branch that fell from the dead ash tree is toppled over. This fell a couple years ago, and it ended up sticking in the ground just like a lawn dart. This thing weighs probably around 2,000 or 3,000 pounds and was pretty well wedged in and solid. Looks like the wind went ahead and took it down. The ash tree still standing, and there's no further limb loss from it. Eventually that thing is going to end up falling. The pond camera, which is just on the left side, is a cellular camera that sends periodic notifications. We have this placed right at the junction of a trail which leads down to the east part of the creek, and that's exiting right at the pond dam itself. And Looking north, we have a fair amount of activity. This is capturing animal activity coming from the barn and from the creek, and all merging right at the pond. Besides the deer that are traversing the area, coyotes are out, and this one was the best looking one I've seen in a long, long time. On the other hand, the coyote down on the pond dam is more typical of what we see with a little bit of mange and more of a gray coloring. Besides the deer and the occasional coyote, as well as occasional bobcat, it's more common to see our neighbor's dog making his rounds down along the trails. It is a little disconcerting that the smaller dogs are wandering the woods while the coyotes are hunting in packs in the same area, typically. Heading on back up to the final stop at the fire pit and the barn. As we're making our way across the pond dam, the ice does look a bit thinner looking at it from this angle. It'll probably be thawed fairly soon. Up the last bit of the hill before we make our final stop at the camera just south of the fire pit. This camera, for the most part, has activity in the parking area beside the barn as we pull in and out. It also has a lot of activity from the neighboring dogs as well as cats. We still have a fairly significant amount of deer movement that traverses the parking area and around that fire pit also.